Good afternoon, everybody. You're very welcome to this bite-sized session on understanding county lines. Please do interact with us throughout the session and do ask any questions as we go along in the question box, which is on your GoToWebinar control panel. As with any training session, you will get out what you put in, so please do try and stay engaged and share best practice and experience where appropriate. We will also endeavour to pause at timely points throughout the webinar to check for any questions, as well as share your thoughts and ideas. Please also be mindful that this is a sensitive subject and the content of the session might be upsetting, so please do take breaks if you need them. Also, as a gentle reminder, if any of the participants are affected by any of the content in today's session, there are signposting details throughout the webinar and links provided to refer to for further guidance and support at the end of the session. Okay, so firstly, a few introductions to put some faces to voices. My name is Kelly Johnson and I'm a Provider Development Officer here at NCFE. Stacey Mann and Angie Rogers are also here with us today. Would you like to say hello, ladies?
Hi everyone, Stacey here.
Hi everyone, it's Angie Rogers here.
Thank you. Stacey is a subject specialist for early years and childcare, also here at NCFE, and Angie Rogers is a subject specialist for teaching and learning. And our role is to support centres through the planning, onboarding and further CPD opportunities for NCFE qualifications with a focus on promoting and advancing learning. We're also really pleased to have Kerry Liask from Northumbria Police join us today. Kerry is a Violence Reduction Liaison Officer for the Education team as part of the Violence Reduction Unit Office at the Police and Crime Commissioner. So I'd just like to say thanks to Kerry, for being with us today and for the support that she's given with this training session. Would you like to say a quick hello, Kerry?
I will do, yes. Hi everyone, my name's Kerry. I'm assuming I've been introduced, but I've managed to get on. I was having a little bit of problem there. It was just nothing was happening. I was panicking slightly, but I'm here now.
No problem. Thank you very much. Okay, so at this point, I'm now going to pass over to Stacey, who's going to tell you a little bit more about the content for today's session.
Thank you, Kelly, and hi everybody and welcome to today's session. Today we will be exploring all of these contents, so we'll be going through an introduction, some key terminology, the risk factors and signs, prevention, signposting, and then of course we'll be taking your questions at the end. We'll be gathering an understanding of county lines and how it applies to us in our roles, and we'll look at terminology in particular because I think that part is very, very important. And then of course the risk factors and signs, Angie and Kerry will be supporting us with today as well. We'll have suggestions for both the practitioner and young people, and lastly provide you with some signposting links and answer any questions that you may have. If there are any questions today that come up that we don't know the answer to, we will try and find those answers for you. As always, we start our session with a quick poll on how confident you are currently feeling with your knowledge and understanding of county lines. So that is with 1 being no to little confidence and 10 being very confident. So you will see on your screens now the poll come up, and we'll just wait for everybody to participate in that poll. So how confident are you with your knowledge and understanding of county lines? Okay, we can see quite a lot of people now have voted. You can see lots of people who are fairly confident, but lots who are feeling they need more knowledge and understanding around understanding county lines. I think it's something that has been something that we've perhaps heard about but don't know or have a deep understanding of what county lines is. So hopefully we can help you with that today. Our expectation for this first question is that you would all be at different stages, which is exactly what we've seen here. And we hope that by the end of this webinar, you're feeling more knowledgeable and confident with your understanding of county lines, and really that you've travelled a journey with us today. County lines is not a new thing. You may have heard about it on the news or in TV shows like Hollyoaks. It's been prevalent in. We've also perhaps got it in our policies and procedures already. We've perhaps done a little bit around county lines. But beyond the headlines and scripts, it's a stark reality for many young people. It may even surprise you to hear that children as young as 5 have been involved in county lines. So I'd like to hear from you now and have a bit of interaction with you guys about what your understanding is of county lines. So can you share any experiences or any of your understanding in the question box for us? The question box cannot be seen by other delegates, so I will make sure that I keep everyone's name confidential in this section. However, please make sure that if you are sharing experiences that you do edit names out as well. So first question, what is your understanding of county lines? And second, have you got any experiences that you'd like to share with us? And I'll just give everybody a little bit of time to find the question box first of all and navigate themselves around this, this platform. And secondly, to type. Okay, so some limited experience and okay, so we've got some ideas coming up here of young people being used to traffic drugs around the UK. Drug trafficking across counties from gangs from the city, targeting young children. I think within London it was associated with different gangs in different postcode areas, the limitations and intimidation that comes with this. Children being exploited to move drugs contraband around the country, no personal experiences on the topic. Traffic drugs across counties in UK, grooming of young children, so that's a new word that's come into some of the comments that are here. Young people and children to assist in the transportation of drugs around the UK, young people delivering drugs all over, as well as young children. Shorter training previously. Yeah, it's often part of safeguarding, and what we really wanted to do was highlight all of the different sections of safeguarding. I remember very well when I first started delivering safeguarding training that it was very broad, and we had, you know, your typical signs of abuse and your types of abuse and confidentiality and all of those different things. But now there's so many elements to safeguarding that we really thought these bite sizes would help in supporting a little bit of a deeper understanding of each one. So we've got some more comments here. Drug gangs using younger people to deliver drugs, and the understanding around being transported from one area to another, but often no experience. And I think that is probably one of the most difficult parts of safeguarding, is when we haven't got an example, we haven't got examples to refer to. I think some of us, or most of us, will have examples of different types of abuse that we may have dealt with, disclosures. We may have have been thinking about how we've dealt with certain situations, or a colleague's told us about something. But if you haven't got that direct experience, it's nice to be able to hear some of the case studies that you'll be hearing today. And the last comment, younger people being involved in violence and gang-related activities leading to further criminal activity. So thank you for so much interaction. That's fantastic. So let's have a look a little bit deeper. The UK government defines county lines as: county lines is a term used to describe gangs and organised criminal networks involved in exporting illegal drugs into one or more importing areas within the UK, using dedicated mobile phone lines or other form of deal line. They are likely to exploit, rightly said that in the comments, children and vulnerable adults. So let's just have a look at that for a second. So children, absolutely, but also vulnerable adults, to move and store the drugs and money, and they will often use coercion, intimidation, violence, including sexual violence, and weapons. County lines activity and the associated violence, drug dealing and exploitation has a devastating impact on young people, vulnerable adults and local communities. So let's take a look at some of the statistics surrounding county lines to put the sort of severity of this issue into context. 90% of English police forces have seen county lines activity in their area, and the violence is getting worse. I think we can also safely say that it's also prevalent in all force areas. 4 in 5 parents are worried about county lines in their local area. According to the Office for National Statistics, there's been an increase in knife crime, drug-related offences and youth violence in many parts of the UK. Police forces and multi-agency partnerships have been working hard to disrupt county lines and tackle gang activity. In response, criminal networks have changed their methods and are increasingly targeting vulnerable young people who are less likely to be suspects. As we emerge from the pandemic, many young people are at risk of involvement with gang activity. Now is an opportune moment to evaluate and look at ways to improve gang-related prevention and rehabilitation services. From 2019 to 2020, there was a 13% increase in drug offences compared to 2018 to 2019. 102 phone lines used for drug dealing were closed in September 2020. More than 46,000 children in England are thought to be members of criminal gangs. 46,000 children in England are thought to be members of criminal gangs. Those are quite shocking statistics. I'm just going to check to see if we've got any comments there. Please do feel free to interact. Okay, yeah, so we've got lots of arrests going on as well. Yeah, it's constantly in the media at the moment. So what you will see here is a map which shows all recorded supply routes for heroin or crack cocaine between police force areas. The routes are colour-coded according to the area that they originate from, and the thickness of the line indicates the frequency with which that supply route is used. The link for this will be at the end of the presentation, and I really do think it's worth having a look at in a little bit more detail. Whilst heroin and crack are generally supplied by street dealers, recreational drugs, so for example, powder cocaine, cannabis and ecstasy, are supplied in a number of other ways. That is through social media. So there's an increasing anecdotal evidence that young people are sourcing recreational drugs via social media. Recent research found that 1 in 4 young people had seen illicit drugs advertised for sale on social media. Cannabis was the drug most commonly seen advertised on social media, followed by cocaine, ecstasy, and Xanax. So county lines. Some county lines drug runners sell cannabis or powder cocaine as a sideline, and the data on the powder cocaine used in particular appears to show a county lines pattern with increased use in rural areas. Then we have what is called the dark web, which is a small but growing part of the recreational drug market, particularly for new psychoactive substances. The proportion of recreational drug users who reported obtaining drugs from the dark web increased from 12% to 29% between 2014 and 2019 in the UK. Then there's social supply. So many recreational drug users obtain drugs for free through their social networks rather than buying from a dealer. Roughly half of recreational drug users obtain drugs through social networks. Yeah, I agree. I just want to just reiterate really and stress that the numbers are huge. The statistics are massive. And it's really time now for us to think about this even more to see what we can do to prevent and support, which Angie will be supporting with us later, and Kerry will be putting into context for us as well. So how county lines operations work. So this flow chart shows us exactly how. So for example, a gang in London imports heroin. They move this heroin from London to Bournemouth using children on trains. The children base themselves in various cuckooed flats around the town, which we'll come to in a minute. Flats that are owned by vulnerable adults, but are used by the gang as a base to move the drugs from. Users in Bournemouth wanting to purchase heroin will call a phone number known as the Superman line and go to collect the drugs. Rival lines will also operate. The Batman line may also move heroin from London to Bournemouth. Users may then start to call the Batman line to purchase heroin. The conflict over the territory in which the deals operate is where you will see the forms of violence, most often associated with county lines. So that's things like what we're seeing in the media at the moment, children being stabbed, for example. Of course, this is not how every line works, and some operate much more locally than the given example, but this is why you hear stories of children from one city being found in some faraway town, unable to tell you how they got there. So again, I think this is a lovely opportunity to bring everybody in to just interact with me a little bit. So do I want to know how close I'm sitting to these Bournemouth flats? We had a cuckoo property near to my home that was recently raided by West Mercia police. Children found at the property were as young as 12. That's shocking, isn't it? That's really shocking. And thank you for sharing that information with us. And what I'm going to do now is ask all of you, what other associated crimes do you think could be involved in county lines? So what do you already know of as what associated crimes? So what other things are we thinking about here when we're thinking about county lines? And already, I'll just carry on talking while you are typing. Already we're starting to think about, as we go through some of the examples here of what county lines might look like, is how the vulnerabilities are just getting broader. And then of course there's other things coming into play here with in terms of associated crimes, and we've talked about some of those already, so please feel free to pop those into the question box. So we've got sex trafficking, we've got knife crime, abuse, violence, drug abuse, we've got child sexual exploitation, and we have got a separate session on CSE. Car theft, stabbing, robbery, increased housebreaking, sex trafficking. We've got another example here. There was a recent stabbing in an Asda in Redditch in Worcestershire, thought to be linked to a drugs gang. Many youths were arrested and not from the area, arrived by train. Prostitution, gang initiations, which have varied, theft, threats, knife crime, bullying, exploitation, trafficking of asylum seekers. Lots and lots to think about here, and very, very sad associated crimes coming up there. So you've found some of these ones yourselves already, but we have a major cross-cutting issue here that involves drugs, violence, gangs, weapons, all of the safeguarding that we've discussed today so far, and all of the ones that are in our bite sizes actually. Criminal and sexual exploitation, modern slavery, and also missing persons. Okay, so I am now going to go on to some terminology. So I'm going to explain some of the words and terms that are commonly used when describing county lines activity. If you hear someone using these words, or you notice them in text, in social messages, it could mean that they are involved in or might know of county lines activity. As a parent myself, when I was reading through these, I was really taking note, and I think that is often the case when we do safeguarding training, that we think about all of these things on a personal level as well as a professional level. So I'm going to go through some of these words for you. If you do know any of the answers, well, straight away, let me ask you, does anybody know what any of these words? So we've got cuckooing. Just going to let all of these come up, and then I'll explain them to you. But first of all, I want to see if anybody knows what any of these are. So if we can just put all of those words up. So we've got going country, trapping, trap house or bando, trap line. Got all of these ones coming up. Does anybody know Please do share with us if you know what any of these things mean. So cuckooing, taking over someone's house. Okay, so we've only heard of cuckooing. Some people. Anybody heard of any others? Cuckooing, plugging, these I know. I've heard of wagwan, but no idea. Okay. Okay, so cuckooing is when drug gangs take over the home of a vulnerable person through violence and intimidation, using it as their base for selling and manufacturing drugs. Going country, OT, out of town, going crunch. This is the most popular term that describes County Lines activity. It can also mean the act of travelling to another city or town to deliver drugs or money. Trapping is the act of selling drugs. Trapping can refer to the act of moving drugs from one town to another, or the act of selling drugs in one. Trap house or bando is a building used as a base from where drugs are sold or sometimes manufactured. These houses usually are occupied by someone, usually adult drug users, but sometimes young people are forced to stay in trap houses. We also have trap line here. This refers to when someone owns a mobile phone specifically for the purpose of running and selling drugs. We've got OBS and OPPO, which is refers to the opposition, as in a rivaling neighbourhood gang. Plugging, this is where things have been concealed for transporting, usually inserted into the rectum or vagina. A shotter is a drug dealer. A G is a gram of illegal drugs. A Q is a quarter of an ounce of drugs. An OG stands for original gangster. Move is to go and sell. Wagwan is a greeting, what's going on. Link means a girlfriend on the side. Debt bondage is creating a debt the child has to pay back. And clean skins for new recruits. If you do have a look on the Children's Society's slang dictionary, there is a comprehensive guide about language used in county lines, and that is there's quite a lot of information to take on about terminology, but it is worth referring to. It's also worth stating here that these words will change, of course, as soon as people get to know what they are. So it is important to keep on top of that so you can understand some of the terminology that you may overhear. I'm now going to pass over to Angie, and Angie's going to talk you through risk factors and what to look out for.
Hi and welcome everybody, and thanks for that, Stacey, for it's really in-depth information. It's fantastic. So county lines is a cross-cutting issue that often overlaps with other forms of abuse and criminal exploitation. And it can lead to serious physical and emotional harm to children and young people. And this begins with the process of grooming. The grooming process involves the gang in seeking out the child or young person to exploit. And this could be through observing that child's vulnerabilities. And this may be linked to their age, sadly. And as you mentioned earlier in the chat, this is very young individuals that are being targeted. It could be their disability, could be gender, maybe sexual orientation, or even perhaps their social status. So they seek to find out what those children's particular needs or wants are. And this could be for the child having that sense of belonging. It could be having a friendship group or a particular status that they require, or even money. So what they do is they manipulate that child or that young person into believing that by being in the gang, that they can fulfill those child's needs. So I want us to consider for a moment what the other risk factors might be. What do we need to be aware of? So I'm going to put that question out there if you'd like to put in. What risk factors might there be in terms of a child being exploited into county lines? Just want you to have a little think at the moment, and then we'll have a discussion about it. And it could well be that some of you have had experience of this through the settings that you're in or the areas that you live in. But please do put any questions that you have into the chat. Yeah, so absolutely right there. We've got broken home. It could be parents that have served time, deprivation, drug users, the parents themselves being drug users, and the children caught up in that situation. Yeah, absolutely. Having learning disabilities, so the children being unaware of what they're getting themselves involved in. Fantastic. Yeah, some brilliant factors coming through there. Well done, brilliant. So if we can go to the next slide now, please, Kelly. We're going to look at these factors. Factors that make county lines gangs more likely to target, groom and exploit a child. And these may include, and some of these you've already mentioned, which is fantastic, for those who have a learning disability, and this could be a mental health condition, could be a mental health condition or illness, or a behaviour issue. And sadly, this could lead to the child to have emotionally based school avoidance, also known as EBSA, where the child is unable to attend school and therefore puts them into more of a vulnerable situation. It could be those who have substance abuse issues, and this could be for themselves or from their parents. It could be those who have been in trouble with the police in the past, or maybe those that have never have to stay under the radar, and that could be linked to perhaps poor parenting or neglect. It could be those who have been in situations of being bullied themselves, or maybe from bullying online. Those who have previous experience of being abused, either inside or outside the home. It could be those who have lived or currently living in unstable home environments. For example, this could be domestic abuse, parental, we've already talked about that, parental substance misuse, but it could also be parent mental health issues or criminal activity. And this could be also related to siblings or other family members, and therefore it gets that whole situation where that child's sort of lost within that situation. It could be those who feel that they are socially isolated, and this could be related to the demographics or geographical location. And for particular areas, the one that I'm thinking of at the moment is sort of rural areas, and that could be Cornwall being so cut off from the rest of the country. It's particularly prevalent there at the moment. Social difficulties that the child may have, and this could be linked to their actual disability, or more recently around during the COVID lockdown. And there has been significant increase in those that are being groomed. And it's those who maybe are in families where there is significant money issues, and this could be again linked to lockdown and the issues surrounding unemployment during that time, or losing their jobs. And this could be to maybe leading to changing their accommodation, having to leave where they live, deprivation, and sadly leading to poverty. It could also be those who already are involved in gangs or the edge of gangs, and this may be through direct involvement or involvement of their siblings. It could be those who have sometime during their lives been looked after. It may be those that have spent time in residential care or in foster care, already placed outside of their home area. They're more vulnerable. It could be those who are classed as not in education, employment or training, known as NEET. And this may be due to being excluded from mainstream education and attending alternative provisions, such as pupil referral units. Or frequently moving schools. This can be another situation where children get lost in the sort of system, but constantly moving from area to area under different local authorities. And this could also be those that are asylum seekers, those that are seeking refuge, particularly those that have not yet got visas or haven't got the relevant paperwork. And at the moment, this is particularly prevalent with those fleeing war, particularly from Ukraine at this very moment in time, but also those arriving from Syria and Afghanistan, and we really need to be aware of that. So it's vital we recognise the signs and symptoms of a child or young person who may be at risk from the exploitation from these county line gangs. So it's about us being able to recognise them and be able to support them from those very early stages. So here are a few of the signs to be aware of. One might be from a child or young person that's going missing from school, having lots of time off, or going missing from home, having the odd night away, or those that are children in care, that could be missing from, going out of the area, travelling to locations or being found in areas that have no obvious connection with them. And this could be including seaside or market towns. It could be those that are unwilling to explain their whereabouts. Where have they been? Where have they been for several days? Where have they been last night? Who have they been with? Also, those that acquire money. Suddenly they've got money and they're buying clothes. They've got accessories or mobile phones that they are unable to account for. Another sign to look out for would be the receiving of excessive amount of text or phone calls at all hours of the day, and having perhaps 1 or 2 mobile phones or headsets or SIM cards. And also having relationships with controlling or older individuals within the group. So watching out for the types of behaviour that may go with that. You may see behaviour such as withdrawing or having sudden changes in their personality or behaviour or the language that they use, because they might take on the persona of the people that they have been with. Leaving home or staying overnight for long periods of time would be worrying, but sadly you may also see self-harm within that child or young person and significant changes in their mental health, such as unexplained injuries. Parental or carers' concerns reported to school or other known individuals. Significant decline in school results or performance. So where you may have seen a young person really doing well at school and being very conscientious, and seeing the behaviour change to actually not being focused, not focused on what they're doing, or and not showing interest in school activity. You may see a change in behaviour, and this could be to their emotional well-being, and as a consequence of that you might actually see overeating, or you might see undereating, leading to eating disorders. Now, in addition to all of those, you may well see them carrying weapons. They may be hidden within their rooms, or you may discover them on their whereabouts. You might find that being isolated from their peers, the social network that they used to have, that they haven't got that group of friends, they've stepped back from that group of friends and they've become more isolated. You may see them overusing the social media, constantly being on their phones. But you also might see fear. You might see them scared. You might see that sense of fear in their faces or in their behaviours. Another one to look out for is the increased amount of visitors that come, maybe not just into the home, but those that are coming to the home outside, maybe in their cars, and watching the comings and goings of the different people that the child or young person may be interacting with. So that source has been adapted from the Home Office graphic. So you may, and that will be attached at the end of the slides, and I think it's an interesting link to go to. It's got some additional information that I think you'll find really useful. So I want us to go now, moving on. So we're looking at those signs. I want us to think about the importance of knowing how to deal with a child or young person, and how they disclose information to you and how you deal with that disclosure, because that's really important. I'm just going to have a quick look before we go into that to have a look at some of the questions. Brilliant there. That yeah, you're absolutely right with some of those risk factors. Absolutely. and that we've covered those signs and symptoms. And remember that some of you will be the ones that will witness those. You will be firsthand looking at those signs. You are the observant ones in that setting or that workplace or wherever you may be. You are the ones that are going to see that change in that behaviour. And it's important to know that when a child comes to you, that you do the right thing. So thinking about the do's. So firstly, it's important that you should respond to a disclosure by being calm, listening carefully, and being non-judgmental. It's important to let the child tell their story freely in their own way without constant interruption. You must acknowledge how difficult it may have been for them to come to you in the first place to disclose. So you must reassure the child or young person that they are doing the right thing. And it's really important at that point, when you're offering that reassurance, is to remember the tone in your voice and the body language that you may use to make sure that it is very sort of reassuring. Immediately after disclosure, write down and date the comments and statements made by the child using the exact words, and it has to be the exact words. You have to have evidence that's accurate to what the child has said to you. Record any information or any observations about the child's mood or demeanour that they have, or the change in their behaviour. And recording any of this must be in line with policies and procedures of the setting. The role of the person hearing the disclosure is not to interview or gather evidence. This is the responsibility of specially trained caseloaders or police officers. It's just about recording exactly what the child or young person has said to you. Communicate this information to the Child Protection Helpline or the Child Wellbeing Unit to assist in the assessment and the investigation process. And now it's really important to remember the don'ts when you're dealing with disclosure. So please don't make promises that you are not able to keep. And I'm sure lots of you already know that. Not to interrogate the child or young person, to make them feel more vulnerable than they already are. Never ask why something has happened. That's not for you to ask. Never criticise the alleged perpetrator. Ask them to repeat. Never ask them to repeat to another member of staff or adult. Instead, explain what you do next and to whom you will speak, and in that reassuring manner. And always write up and report concern. Never leave it to the end of the day to write up the concerns. And that's the same with any safeguarding issue that I'm sure you're aware about. And it's really important that we follow the correct procedures. So on the next slide, you will see that this is taken from the government document, Keeping Children Safe in Education 2021. And it's really important that when taking action as a practitioner, that you follow the correct procedures for reporting and recording. And that will, although that's set out there, and it's really important that we follow the correct procedures for our setting. And you should all know who obviously your DSL is for where you are. And that's just part of general good practice and safeguarding to protect children from harm. So there's quite a lot to take in on those last few slides, but what's going to happen now? I'm going to pass you over to Kerry, who's really going to help with everything that we've just talked about. It's going to put it into context. So I'd like to pass over to Kelly now, who's going to talk us through some county line case studies. Thank you.
Hello everyone. So I work directly with services who help young people and children get out of county lines. I work with both the police and with some community and charity settings who deal with a lot of really serious cases of involvement in county lines where they've been, very heavily exploited. I just want to point out as well, we're talking about very young children, and of those 46,000, that I think is a very conservative estimate, to be honest, now that I've worked in partnership with these charities and groups. I think that's probably, it could even be only half of what we know of. But the youngest child that we know of that was involved in county lines up to date, it was only 6, and I think that is a really shocking age, because I think when you say 12, people go, oh my god, 12 is so young, and it is so young, but 6 is that step beyond that. And the little boy that we know of that was 6 was getting used in Birmingham on a housing estate, and he was getting sent all over the place to drop off drugs, obviously very unaware of what he was doing, what he was taking, just being given sort of sweets and chocolate and little bits of money to do what he was doing. There was clearly a lot of neglect in his life as well, because his parents, weren't around to be watching him. But that went on for months before that was finally taken seriously and stopped. But he could have been knocking on anybody's door, dropping off drugs. You don't know. It's not just the drugs part and the road safety and all the obvious things. He could have been knocking on, a sexual predator's door or anything. So it is a very complex thing. The case study I want to tell you about, where it's, I suppose, a bit concerning, is we have a lot of young people in and around Newcastle, which is near where I live, who are involved, because being quite a big city, it's got quite a lot of county lines activity going on, and because they run right towards the coast where I live in South Shields, and they run right into sort of Durham, Teesside, up to Northumberland, and the much more rural areas. And some of the rural areas are, quite affluent areas where you wouldn't expect this to be going on, but it is quite an issue now. And we're finding that more and more. It's not just in cities and towns. They're running out of little villages and places that you would never imagine this goes on, but it does. And one young person I want to tell you about was a young lad. We'll call him Carl. He's not called Carl, but we'll call him Carl. He was very heavily involved. He got involved because one day he was in a takeaway shop and he was a little bit short of money. And a young lad about the same age as him said, oh yeah, I'll give you it. I think it was about £1.20 short. It wasn't a lot, but he gave him the money. And Carl was obviously grateful and just thought, he was like, oh, thanks very much, mate. Got his food, left the premises. A couple of days later, same lad approaches him and said, you owe us that favour. And obviously Carl was like, what do you mean I don't owe you a favour? And he said, you do owe me a favour, because I gave you that money the other day, and Carl didn't have any money to give him back. So he thought, well, he felt really obliged to do this favour. And the lad said, can you just keep this for us overnight? And he just give him like a package. So Carl, a little bit sort of unwillingly sort of took the package, put it in his backpack and kept it, and met him the next day thinking, well, I'll just give him it back. That'll be that. And, it'll be over with. And when he went to meet him, he said, oh, no, I meant like just keep it overnight and then I'll tell you what to do with it. And Carl said, well, no, like I want to give you it back. And the young lad wouldn't take it back. He said, no, he said, you owed us a favour. The favour is you've got to sell what's in the package. And he said, well, what is in the package? He went, it's full of drugs. And he said, I'm not doing that. And he said, well, you'll have to now, because your fingerprints are all over it. Your DNA is all over it. He went, I'm not taking it back off you, and I'll report you and you'll get caught. I'll ring the police now, and I know where you live and everything. So anyway, Carl quite quickly became very heavily involved against his will, but was in a position where he wasn't really confident enough to say no. And obviously once he got involved with the gang properly, he was not daft enough to say no, really. So he started getting transported to Nottingham, sometimes just on these like late buses, these like mega buses. Sometimes on a train, sometimes they would take him down by car. He was staying on the floor of mainly of what you would call a trap house. It was a flat who belonged to a drug addict who'd been cuckooed, as we call it. It had been taken over for quite a long period of time, so it felt more like a squat in appearance. Carl was just sleeping on the floor of that, sometimes for weeks at a time, not just an odd day here and there. Sometimes this was for weeks at a time, with all kinds of people coming and going. He said he never slept because he didn't feel safe enough to sleep, because he was always worried that he was going to get robbed of the drugs that he was given, because sometimes he'd be given such a large amount of drugs he wasn't allowed to come home till he'd sold them all or made a particular amount of money. So sometimes that would take literally 2-3 weeks. So he would be awake pretty much 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and eating very little, because you know they get promised all this money, but in reality they get paid very little. So he was eating just sort of crisps, Mars bars, cans of pop to try and keep him going. So by the time he was able to come back to Newcastle, he was in a pretty bad state every time, you know, really dishevelled, lost weight, looking really poorly. His family obviously become aware of what he was doing, but couldn't get him out of it because the gang really had him in their clutches, and they kept threatening him to hurt his family if he left. So he was in a position where he really couldn't get out of that. This went on for about 18 months when he went to a local charity, which we're very lucky to have, called Edge North East. And Colette, who runs that charity, mentored him into getting out. And he got out 3 times. I kept getting dragged back in and going back, usually to Nottingham, where he was sent. And then on the 4th time, he was adamant he was out, and he got an apprenticeship because he turned 19 by this time in a local garage. Wouldn't move away, wouldn't move out the area, wanted to stay in Newcastle. But that was, well, I think the apprenticeship started in about end of September. But then in December, he went missing, and he hasn't been sighted yet, which is a huge concern, because I think the longest he'd been missing for before that was about a month. And he hasn't been seen for quite a long time now. So there's massive concerns because we don't know what's happened to him. So that's kind of the harsh reality, I suppose, of a case study where somebody's tried to get out, they did well, they've obviously been dragged back in, and we don't know what's happened to him. But if he does get obviously found again, I think they're going to make massive massive moves to get him out of Newcastle for at least a few years to keep him out of trouble. Generally, once you're age 24, you're not at any risk of becoming involved in county lines unless you're in the vulnerable adult category. You know, you're too old to be one of the kids getting exploited. It would only be if you were becoming a vulnerable adult then from that that you would get involved in that. So it's pretty rare. Once you get a bit older, they don't tend to want you because they can't manipulate you as well as they could when you were a teenager. So you become less useful to them unless you're moving up the ranks. I don't know if we mentioned the county line structure, but you have the manager and the faces at the top who are the people with all the money, all the power. They tend to have legitimate businesses that they use either as a front or to appear like, you know, pillars of the community. So that keeps, you know, the heat off them, because they will have very little to do with the actual day-to-day running. They'll just be taking all the money from the operation. And then you have the elders, who tend to be sort of early to mid-20s, who are the day-to-day managers of the business. They run everything. They'll take over trap houses, they buy the large class A and B drugs, they'll distribute the drugs, they'll buy weapons, they'll handle guns, they'll inflict any serious violence on the children to keep them in line if that's necessary. They'll often be the ones to put the drugs inside of the children. So they're the ones the kids tend to be really scared of. And then under those, you have the kids who are kind of the under managers, who will sort of take direct orders from the elders and then tell the other kids what to do. They tend to be sort of about 15 to 18-year-old, and then under them you get the most heavily exploited, like the runners. They're the ones who get run up and down the country, like the boy I used as our example. They are also in charge of grooming and recruiting new members the most as well. So they'll be told to recruit friends, neighbours, kids. They'll tell them to wait outside schools, parks, approaching any kids. Nobody is kind of above getting involved. Unfortunately, they will target anybody. They're targeting more and more girls now, because girls tend to get searched less, and they tend to be a bit more subtle when they're out and about. They don't get their trap phones out, they'll keep them to themselves. And then under those you've got the teenies, like the really young children. They tend to be upper primary, lower to lower secondary, like age 9 to 12, who are getting groomed, ready to become the runners, so that the runners can make the next stage, and then the next stage if they survive that. Because you tend to find if kids are involved in county lines for 2 years or more, I think it's something like 85% are going to end up in prison, and the other 15% sadly don't make it because of the violence that becomes involved in that. And even if they make prison, they might not make it out of prison because of the gang violence within the prison tends to be getting really serious now, and they often get stabbed within prison, which is a really sad fact, which is why, you know, we need to help these kids get out as much as possible. And they do get a lot of help and support now compared to what they used to. They're not treated as criminals like they used to be. They are treated as victims, even if they've done things wrong and they've broken the law. That will all be taken into consideration if they go to court for whatever they have done, because you know they are so heavily coerced and exploited. So it's got to be taken into consideration. Even if they've done something really bad, like stabbed somebody, you've got to look at what led up to that incident. And quite often they'll have been through some extremely harrowing situations themselves, and maybe it might have been a case of kill or be killed sometimes as well, which is not an excuse for hurting anybody. But if you're in that position where you're going to die, you don't know what you might do to survive, especially if you're only sort of 15 or 16. You're just terrified, and you're put in a really, really horrific position that I don't think any of us would want to be in, or would even want to imagine ourselves or our children to be in. Okay, so that I think is that slide. If you could move on, Kelly. So prevention, I think it's really important to talk to students about prevention. And when I go into schools and colleges, when I deliver my county lines awareness lessons, I always talk about, you know, how kids get approached. And now I know the calls situation in the takeaway shop isn't, you know, always going to be the way, but that is quite a common way where they'll offer kids money, or lend kids money for things, whether it's for that or whether it's for drugs or alcohol. You know, that's quite a common theme. They often approach kids in concerts and gigs that they go to, particularly if those kids are too young to buy alcohol. They'll offer to buy them drinks, and then obviously once they're a little bit under the influence of alcohol, they're more likely to be able to be manipulated, and they're more likely to say yes to doing things that they would normally not do. Or they'll just get them drunk and say, right, we need the money back off you for the drinks. The kid obviously hasn't got that, so they said, oh, they say it's okay, you can meet us tomorrow and you can just do a little job for us, and then that'll just pay that off. And obviously the kid's scared, so they go and meet that person, and it's very similar to what happened to Carl. They'll get you to do one little job that ends up into another little job and another job and another job, and that just goes on, and the kid can't get out of that situation. They'll sometimes get kids to, I don't know if this happens everywhere, but I know it does happen in Newcastle, so I'm imagining it will happen everywhere. But locally we've got a high-end shop called End, and they get kids to queue up for the trainer drops that happen. So they'll say to a kid, you know, we'll give you 40-50 quid if you queue up, because sometimes these queues are, you know, you've got to wait for 8-10 hours. So the kid's thinking, oh, well, that's all right, I'll do that for 50 quid. Then obviously they wait for the kid, they follow them like at a distance, wait for the kid to spend the money, and then approach them, ask for the money back. Obviously the kid hasn't got it, and they say, oh, well, it was just a loan, so you'll have to do this job. And, you know, same thing, get them in that way. They'll often befriend people on social media. So I always tell kids, you know, don't talk to people. Like, obviously if somebody offers you money to do something, just say no. If somebody offers you to do a little job and you can kind of feel it's not legitimate, say no. If somebody offers to buy you a drink, say no. If somebody offers to buy you drugs, you know, I'd like to think for other reasons they'd say no, but just if you're not buying them, then ask what they're giving you them for, what ulterior motive, what they're going to want in return. If somebody befriends you on social media and it doesn't feel right, if it doesn't feel that it's, you know, a normal friendship, or you feel like they're pressuring you to do something, or they're asking you lots of questions about like what you do, your whereabouts, your family, and so your gut sort of tells you that something's not right, I would say listen to your gut, because that is your primal instinct kicking in, and it's telling you that something's not right. And it, you know, because child sexual exploitation goes very much hand in hand with county lines, quite often I'll say, you know, it might be somebody pretending to be your girlfriend or your boyfriend, and they're coming on really strong, but then they're like, oh well, if you love us, you'll do this little job for us, and you know, it ends up like that. And sadly, a lot of people get taken in by that. So that's probably the main things I would advise sort of kids, and stick together as well, because they're much more likely to target a kid on their own than they are in a big group, because they know that there's probably going to be a couple of kids in there who are like, no, don't do that, or don't talk to that person, you know, let's go. Whereas one on their own might be a bit scared to walk away, so they'll stay and talk and get talked into whatever they're trying to get them to do. So it's about sort of having that openness to be able to talk about these things, I think, as well, and know that it goes on, so that kids don't feel like they can't, you know, ask questions or mention things, or speak up if they need to, or speak to you know, a member of staff if that's who they trust, which they often do. I think you know, our young people have usually good relationships with their teachers and lecturers, so I think it's a really ideal sort of person to trust if there is something like that going on. So our relationship sessions have gone really well. We have had some disclosures, which are always, you know, pretty harrowing to listen to, but amazing that that student has been able to be able to, you know, speak up and tell you something. So if that does happen, obviously we spoke about that advice already, just you know, be very open to it, and don't try not to appear too sort of shocked or horrified by whatever they tell you, because it is a very difficult subject to talk about, I think. Okay. Yeah, and I think CPD is really important to keep the training up on this. I think, like Stacey already said, the lingo that they use changes quite often, and the way they speak is quite hard to pick up on, because they use this accent which sounds like they're from southeast London, and they're not. Obviously they're from anywhere in the country, so it can be quite hard to understand. But keeping up with that lingo, and realizing that it's not always linked to county lines either, because it's being glorified through drill music, which is unfortunately very popular, and it's very violence driven music, but a lot of these kids use that language who are not actually involved. They just, you know, think it's cool to talk as if they are, as they call, a roadman who is, you know, involved in county lines. And they'll often say, oh, I'm a roadman, I go up country. They don't really. And you'll find it's quite a difference for the ones who are, you know, pretending because of the music style, to the ones who really are. The ones who really are are far more likely to be a bit sort of edgy, a bit nervous, a bit like really tired, and not sort of really sort of full of bravado about it, I guess. But yeah, some of the things listed on there, just the multi-agency is really important. I think keeping in touch with other agencies that work with kids, so whether it be their foster carers, or if they go to clubs, particularly youth type clubs, where they tend to be quite open with those sort of leaders, keeping in touch with those, and just in case, because you might have picked up on one thing, they might have picked up on something else, their school might have picked up on another thing, and or you know, it could be loads of things, and if you piece that jigsaw together, it could then build a totally different picture to what you originally thought, and that might just give you that help to sort of identify those kids that are at risk. And I think we've already sort of been through that, haven't we, Kelly? I think, yeah, we've been through these. That don't accept gifts. Yeah, I don't know if I mentioned that. The money and gifts, definitely don't do that. And they will give quite expensive gifts sometimes, these gangs, like expensive trainers, watches, perfume, jewelry. It'll be sometimes really, really expensive stuff. So I think you've got to question why somebody would do that, especially if you didn't know them very well. And yeah, don't keep any packages for anybody, because you don't know what's in them. It's really important. And then moving on to the last slide, I think there is a lot of support out there. The police do have specific officers, because they have to be specially trained, because they might have been through sexual abuse. You know, they might have been kidnapped, they might have been really violently hurt. A lot of these kids are stabbed. It's non-fatally usually, because they stab them somewhere they know will hurt, but won't have to get them to hospital, so that the kid will be terrified that they're going to get stabbed worse next time. But it's just more like a fear thing. So they might have been through all those sort of things. So these officers are highly trained to go through that. Fearless is absolutely amazing because it offers anonymous, it's basically Crime Stoppers, but it's for young people and it's aimed at young people. The website's got a lot of information on, but you anonymously report any concerns about yourself or anyone else, and they will literally take that information and pass it to the police. If you've accidentally implicated yourself in that disclosure about somebody else, they will take that information out about you and just leave in the stuff that you've put about somebody else. And that's really important, I think, because a lot of people won't talk to the police because they don't feel, you know, confident or safe doing that, or they don't want to appear as a grass if it's a young person. So Fearless is amazing for that. Mentioned earlier. So the positive outcome is I had a boy in a school. I was delivering a lesson not about county lines, it was about relationships and healthy relationships to stop getting into it, like domestic abuse. And a lad, just a few things he said, and it was using a few of the terminologies. He did talk about going up country. He did talk about some of the drugs. He didn't know I had heard that bit. The up country bit he was quite openly talking about. And he said he'd been to London. And there's just a few things, and he looked shattered. It was a Monday, this lesson. He looked really tired, and I thought, you know, he's 15. Could have been on his computer, but he said he wasn't interested in computers. When I just asked him some general questions, just kind of seeing how his answer fitted with the way he appeared. He had a very big, heavy gold chain on. I just could see the back of it through his shirt. So anyway, I reported what I felt he was involved in county lines to the school. The school were adamant he wasn't, and that he was, you know, a good kid. He's not involved in anything like that. But I didn't listen to that, and I took it straight to the police, and you know, took his details and exactly what I'd felt and what he'd said. And anyway, it was a long time till I went back in the school because of the pandemic. But when I went back in the school, pulled us into the office to thank us because he had been involved in county lines. Unfortunately, it was his own dad who'd put him into that with his younger 12-year-old brother. He was running them all over the country, delivering drugs, buying drugs, sleeping in some god-awful places. But he got out because obviously of my disclosure. He's got a lot of help. They moved him back down to be with his mum who lived down near Leicester, and he's doing really, really well now. He's completely out of it. He was also starting to take drugs himself. He's completely stopped doing that. I think he's just turned 17 and he's doing really well. So there is good outcomes. There is lots of happy endings if they get the right help and support, but I think that's the really important part, that they do get that help and support, and that, you know, that we are very aware, and anything, even if it's just something little, don't feel, you know, scared to pass that on, whether it's to your own safeguarding team or the police. You can do that through 101, and you can do that anonymously with them as well as Fearless. So just make sure you do that if necessary. And signposting, I think we've got a few on the list. Howard Kelly, yeah, these are some of the signposting that you can use. Fearless is on there, as you can see. There's some really good resources on all those websites, and there's, you know, more information probably than we've given you today, although I think today is probably covered as much as that you would need to know for for your roles, hopefully. Okay, I think that's it from me.
Oh, thanks, Kerry. That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for all that input. That was absolutely, really sort of put it all together for us with those case studies. So thank you. So we're just going to take a little bit of time now just to reflect. I want to pass it over to you now and think about the content that we've covered today. We're going to use the question box again, if that's okay with you, to share your thoughts and responses on what we've discussed today. So please take a few moments to think about the following questions. What are your key takeaways from this session? What will you do next? What impact will this have? And how will this benefit or perhaps impact your learners? So we're going to just give you a couple of minutes. I know we've overrun a little bit, but I just need you to take a couple of minutes to complete the activity. That would be great. Thank you. Please do put them in the chat if you've got any of those answers to those questions. It would be good to have your responses. Okay, even if you don't feel like putting it in the box, you can take those questions away with you for sure to have a little think and reflect on the session would be great. I think that's great here. We've got after a hug from consulting a colleague, I will be completing my CPD. Great, that's absolutely great, and sharing with peers, and that's what we want. Disseminate the information. That's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, really good. We've also got clear awareness, further research. It was upsetting, and it was really upsetting to hear about the young children. I agree with that. The key takeaways, knowing more about how the CYP could be used and to bring into our sessions at college. Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, brilliant. Another key takeaway is how prolific this issue is and how many people it can affect. Yeah, that was shocking. The statistics were really shocking. Yeah, interesting with the key terminologies. Yeah, it's really to sort of make young people aware of that language that is used. And I'm great that the information is going to be shared with colleagues and that it's been really useful. Yeah, thank you very much for those that are having to log off, because I know that we have run over slightly. So can I just thank everybody for staying on and just sort of bearing with us for that little bit. Thank you very much. So we're just going to go through the intentions on the screen. So just have a look. So we're going to look at explore what County Lines is, including the statistics, the signs and indicators. That was really important, and what can be done to aid prevention. Support the education of County Lines in schools. That's an absolute must, and we can do that through the support of yourselves. Link support to learning, as well as questions answered. Centres will be able to apply the knowledge to policies and procedures in the workplace. Absolutely, it needs to be spoken about. We need to be making people aware. So thank you very much. So on a final note, we're just going to go right back there to ensure that you have what you need and feel supported. We would really appreciate your suggestions on what CPD or training you would find useful and beneficial. So if you have any ideas for further CPD sessions, please let us know, and our emails are there, so you can contact either myself, Stacey or Kelly, and be really interesting to know, because we're here to help. Or do put your ideas in the question box into the short evaluation after the webinar. Thank you. Now I'm going to pass you back to Kelly just to have a look at the poll.
Thanks, Angie. Thank you very much for everyone for staying on this amount of time, because like Angie said, I do appreciate we've run over slightly. But what I'd just like to do, as we've now reached the end of the webinar, is just to do another quick poll on how confident you're feeling now with your knowledge and understanding of County Lines, considering the information that has been given by Stacey, Angie and Kerry throughout this just over an hour. So please just do take a moment to have a think about your confidence levels now. So we have got some responses coming in very swiftly, and I can see very quickly a distinct shift from that 1s and 2s and 3s and 4s. Okay, I think we've got all the results that we're going to get. So I'm going to close that poll, and I'm going to just share the results. So many thanks for those that did put a response in. And as you can see, as I said, the results do show a significant shift with the attendees that have taken part in that last poll, that our confidence levels have shifted away from that 1 to 2 and 3 to 4 bracket. So that's really pleasing. And it was our hope, for this being the final question, that you would all have felt that you travelled a journey with us today and that your confidence levels had improved. And we do hope that by the end of this webinar, you are definitely feeling now more knowledgeable and self-assured about your knowledge and understanding of county. So I do appreciate we have run over, but if it's okay with Angie and Kerry, we don't mind staying on just a little bit longer if anyone's got any outstanding questions. Just while people may be writing in any further questions that they may have, as a gentle reminder, if any of the content has been upsetting to you today, or you have been affected by any of the content in today's session, please do refer back to the signposting details for further information, help and support. And finally, lastly on this slide, we have included some of the links that we have referred to throughout this presentation today, and these are available on the PowerPoint slide deck that's available to download in the handout section. So in there is the www.gov.uk, and this is a really useful resource to refer to for more information. And as we have said, the Children's Society, the Slang Dictionary, is a very interesting read, but that comes with a caveat that I'm sure what's in there at the moment will very quickly change. But like I said, very interesting read, given that I've also got 2 young girls as well. So at this point, like I said, we will keep an eye on that question box if we have got any questions coming in, and we'll stay on the webinar for that little bit longer. But as we have run over, please do feel free now to leave the webinar. And when you do leave the webinar, we'd really appreciate if you could complete that short evaluation that will pop up. And that's to help us to make any future improvements and or changes to the service and support that we provide. For those that are going to start to pop off the webinar, we would like to just say thanks to everyone that has been with us today, and all our colleagues and Kerry for being on the webinar today to support this very important topic. And on behalf of everyone here at NCFE, we do wish you all a continued safe and successful year. That's a lovely, lovely comment. And just before, while people are leaving, if you are still here, I just want to read this out. Applause, clapping, cheers from across the office. Thank you ever so much. Really enjoyed it and hope you run more in the future. Well, thank you very much for that comment. That does delight us that we get that kind of feedback, because that's what we are here trying to do, is help people like yourselves out there working with these young people.